Hello everyone, Leaf Reed here, and today we have another book, Thus Spake Zarathustra by Friedrich Nietzsche. I believe this might be Nietzsche's most popular or well-known work. There's of course Beyond Good and Evil, and I can't think of the other ones right now, but this has basically been considered one of his main works at least. I'm a bit conflicted on this work, and maybe Nietzsche in general, because, how do I say this? Nietzsche is very good at identifying the problems with society, religion, and culture, but he kind of has a solution that doesn't exactly work, in my opinion, which is to replace the weak, merciful, maternal Christian church with a more masculine, self-independent, pagan brutality, or Uberism, if you will. We can get more into that later, but I just want to talk about the work itself first. Now, this is a weird book in the sense that it's kind of laid out as a play, which I was not expecting at all, with characters and lines and things like that. And Zarathustra, I think people kind of know this, or at least they know the title from the 2001 Space Odyssey, which goes bum 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 bum, in the intro. So I was like, okay, so what inspired this piece of music? It has to be good. And honestly, I don't like this. I don't like this book because, well, one, on a certain level, yes, I did not understand what was going on, and in the sense that I almost needed a compendium to explain the scenes, because you have this story of this man who, well, first he's in the forest and then he goes into the town, but he goes up into a cave in the mountains, and then he has all these characters approach him and interact with him, and he has all these little adventures, I guess, and they're all supposed to be highly symbolic. And the issue is that a lot of them don't make any sense. A lot of them by their own don't, like, I don't get them. What's the point of I can't even think of them right now. But like it's one thing to remember the parable or the thing, and it's another thing to remember also what it means and what it represents, and it's not clear. Except actually for the not the very first, but the second scene. And so this is the opening of Thus Spake Zarathustra. When Zarathustra was 30 years old, he left his home and the lake of his home, and went into the mountains. There he enjoyed his spirit and solitude, and for 10 years did not weary of it. But at last his heart changed. And rising one morning with the rosy dawn, he went before the sun, and spake thus unto it: Thou great star, what would be thy happiness if thou hadst not those for whom thou shinest? So the initial setup to this novel or play is that Zarathustra is a man, and he goes through these kind of encounters and episodes, basically, and they're supposed to be metaphorical, almost like a biblical text in a way, which is admirable to try to replicate. So Zarathustra himself, so that name is not a made-up name. That is the name of the progenitor of the Zoroastrian religion, which is usually titled Zarathustra or Zoroaster. And I think there's just two names just because of the passage of time and the slight translations, how you have Odysseus and Ulysses, his Greek and Roman counterpart. So that name is borrowed from that very ancient religion, or Zoroastrian, which is apparently the first monotheistic religion that appeared in around Azerbaijan or that sort of Eurasian area. And actually, I'm going to do a book on the Gathas as well. But anyway, so this is like a modern Zarathustra, and he's trying to explain, I guess, Nietzsche's teachings through story and parable, which is a great idea. I just don't think he does it super well. And so in this opening chapter, he kind of comes down out of the mountains, and he sees an old priest who's singing in the forest, and he's singing hymns to the birds and to nature. And Nietzsche basically said essentially that, Zarathustra said, "Oh, doesn't the old fool realize he sings to no one, for God is dead?" Yeah, and it does it does this kind of, writing like, "Lo, this cup is again empty, going to empty itself, and Zarathustra is again going to be a man. Thus began Zarathustra's down going." So it's kind of sort of trying to be the Bible. I've never heard anyone say that, but just from reading this, that's what it kind of feels like. It's supposed to be this epic parable kind of thing. "Would that I were wiser. Would that I were wise from the very heart like my serpent. But I am asking the impossible. Therefore I ask my pride to go always with my wisdom. And if my wisdom should some day forsake me, alas, it loveth to fly away. May my pride then fly with my folly." Thus began Zarathustra's down going. And I think a lot of chapters end with "Thus spake Zarathustra." But yeah, it's very hard to understand where it's almost too many different metaphorical things when simplicity would just suffice. But I feel like he's trying to like build it up beyond what it should be. Anyway, in the next scene, what happens is he goes into the town, and there is a tightrope walker. And the tightrope walker is going across, and everyone's watching him, looking up. And, he's kind of going across, and what happens is he ends up slipping and falling to his death. And surprisingly, this is Nietzsche's idea of the Uberman or the Superman, in the sense that this is a man who is reaching for the infinite, for the impossible. He's going against all odds, and it's almost worth dying in that pursuit of perfect balance, of perfect equilibrium. That's the only kind of goal worth achieving, which is walking such a narrow path like a tightrope, that and by yourself, that you achieve that impossible state, and that slavery is worse than death in that sense, and slavery to a church or religion is worse than not striving to be your best in that sense. "And what doeth the saint in the forest?" asked Zarathustra. The saint answered, "I make hymns and sing them, and in making hymns I laugh and weep and mumble. Thus do I praise God. With singing, weeping, laughing, and mumbling do I praise the God who is my God. But what dost thou bring us as a gift?" When Zarathustra had heard these words, he bowed to the saint and said, "What should I have to give thee? Let me rather hurry thence, lest I take aught away from thee." And thus they parted from one another, the old man and Zarathustra laughing like schoolboys. When Zarathustra was alone, however, he said to his heart, "Could it be possible? This old saint in the forest hath not yet heard of it, that God is dead." And I think that's where the famous line comes from, that God is dead. And again, I'll be very open. I don't agree with Nietzsche on a lot of his points. So he has this conversation with his priest. The priest says, "I'm singing and mumbling and doing random things in the forest, and that's how I praise God, by doing random things that don't help anyone." And Nietzsche, or Zarathustra through the Zarathustra, is like, "Well, that's stupid." And he basically doesn't even tell him to his face, but he whispers to his own heart that God is dead. I don't know. I just fail to see the profoundness of that thought. That it's just like, oh, I mean, if anything, you could say it's a reflection of maybe the disillusionment of the church at that time, that they were so random and didn't know what they were doing, that for one to say God is dead to themselves doesn't seem like a big deal, because the people representing that idea are so out of it and out of touch. And it's like, I guess, yeah, I mean, sure. So it's something that he just says to himself as if it's self-evident, but I don't know. Anyway, Zarathustra arrived in the next town. He found many people assembled in the marketplace, for it had been announced that a rope dancer would give a performance, and Zarathustra came to the people, and he said, I teach you the Superman. Man is something that is to be surpassed. What have ye done to surpass him? All beings here too have been created beyond themselves. All beings here too have created something beyond themselves, and ye want to be the ebb of that great tide, and would rather go back to the beast than the Superman. What is the ape to man? A laughingstock, a thing of shame, and just the same shall man be to the Superman, a laughingstock, a thing of shame. So very quickly, we're moving along here to the town, and Nietzsche's kind of like preaching to these people, and he's saying, you should always try to be the best version of yourself. You should always attempt to surpass yourself, rather than squander your time in frivolities and distractions, and not trying to make yourself the best possible character you can be. So it's kind of a very type A attitude, very whatever the opposite of a hippie is. He's very driven. This is kind of like the Chad guy who works out and is always reading, always focused, obsessed almost with self-improvement, on being better to prove himself. And maybe it's not a personality that essentially is satisfied with himself. I don't know. It reminds me of Olympic athletes. Some of them would practice a certain sport or action every single day because of some insecurity, like they have some weird webbed feet or something, and so they use that grind and that goal to become happy with themselves. But in this case, it's not saying it's based on any kind of insecurity. It's just the natural way of things. And of course, he preaches to the crowd, and they don't listen to him. They're like, yeah, whatever. We don't. You're crazy. We don't hear what you have to say. You're just like that priest in the forest. Basically, we don't want to listen to you. And then the incident with the tightrope dancer happens. And so I don't know. I just read this as like, oh, I'm telling you that you need to be a Chad. You need to be the best possible version of yourself. And it's kind of like discounting other people's abilities and stances. And it is true. A lot of people are just generally lazy, but it's kind of like people don't want to be told that they need to try to be better, especially when they're struggling just to get by. Zarathustra thought, man is a rope stretched between the animal and the superhuman, a rope over an abyss, a dangerous crossing, a dangerous wayfaring, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous trembling and halting. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. What is lovable in man is that he is an overgoing and a downgoing, etc., on and on and on. So he's saying, like, why can't people just, be better and strive to be better and nurture themselves in such a way. And I do really like his metaphor here, how a person is not in a complete state at any time. And I think that really is true, that we think of that, oh, I am who I am. It's like, no, you're always becoming someone else. And it always is good to have and he's right, it is always good to have a goal and an idea at the end of the rope, that's where you want to be, and you have to work towards it and improve yourself constantly in order to get there. I like that metaphor, because it's very clear, and I remembered it from this book. That's the thing I really remembered most from this book and what I took away from it. Yeah, and just some of this text is just very like overly verbose. Like it doesn't need all of this extra stuff because it gets, the meaning gets lost in it, you know? Here he goes on here about warriors and war. I know the hatred and envy of your hearts. Ye are not great enough to know of hatred and envy. Then be great enough to be ashamed of them. But if ye cannot be saints of knowledge, then I pray you, be at least its warriors. There are the companions and forerunners of such saintship. I see many soldiers, but I could not see many warriors. Uniform one calleth what they wear. May it not be uniform what they therewith hide. Ye shall be those whose eyes ever seek for an enemy, for your enemy, and with some of you there is hatred at first sight. Anyway, it's just a lot of preaching. It sounds like a preacher, but for atheism. I don't know how else to say it, and it's very tiring to read. I'm not going to lie. Like, this book is hard to read. And I'm sure someone's going to say, well, you just don't get it. And it's like, that's fine. I don't want to understand what this guy, I mean, I don't want to get what he's saying because I don't really think it's all that deep. You're basically in a, uber male, like this is just the Sigma male grind set religion version of that, oh, I'm going to be the best, I'm going to be so good. It's like, oh, it's so tiring to read. I mean, the first two chapters are good because, you get the guy in the forest, you get the tightrope walker. That's very distinct. It very much sticks in your mind. I don't know. It's just not the philosophical text that I really wanted to read. Yeah, here's one. The three metamorphoses. So you think this would be interesting or whatever. Three metamorphoses of the spirit do I designate to you. How the spirit become a camel, a lion, and the lion at last a child. Many heavy things are there for the spirit, the strong load-bearing spirit, in which reverence dwelleth, for the heavy and the heaviest longeth its strength. What is heavy? So asketh the load-bearing spirit. He kneeleth down like a camel, and want to be well laden. What is the heavy thing, ye heroes? Ask the load-bearing spirit, that it may take upon ye, and rejoice it to my strength. It is not this, to humiliate oneself in order to mortify one's pride, to exhibit one's folly, to mock one's wisdom. Or is it this, to desert our cause with celebrating a triumph? Yeah, that's my red flag now, I think, in philosophy books. If the philosopher is asking open questions to himself, he hasn't thought about it enough to just write down the conclusion. The process of thought is that we have ideas fight each other and collide, and I have more confidence in a philosopher that will say to a question, I don't know, then it could be this, it could be that, it could be this. Because it means they've thought about it so thoroughly, they just can't answer it. And that answer is going to be the same for someone who has done all the thinking and for someone who has done none of the thinking. And this is kind of in between, where he's thought about it enough to have different possibilities, but none of them, or most of them, are just time wasters. Like, oh yeah, this is kind of weird, but maybe not. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll think about it some more. I don't know. And like this whole metaphor, like it sounds like such a good setup. How a camel becomes a lion, becomes a child. It's like, that sounds like something that people would talk about Nietzsche. But you read it and it just is verbose musings. These are notions, not ideas. A notion is something that you need to think about and develop until it becomes a distinct idea. So, yeah, I mean, that's all I can say about it. Yeah, I don't know. He's an atheist preacher. That's the only thing I can really say about when reading this again. It's really funny. Does this actually relate to any of the Gathas or Zoroastrianism? As far as I can tell, there's no relations, but I haven't delved into Zoroastrian too intensely. And in Zoroastrianism, there's a lot of focus on things like certain cleansing waters and fire and truth and lies, and those are kind of the symbols and axioms in Zoroastrianism, but don't appear at all in here, really. Here's a fun line from Nietzsche. Nietzsche has a lot of fun views on women. Much has Zarathustra spoken also to us women, but never spake he unto us concerning women. And I answered her, concerning women one should only talk unto men. Talk also unto me of women, said she. I am old enough to forget it presently. And I obliged the old woman and spake unto her. Everything in woman is a riddle, and everything in a woman hath one solution. It is called pregnancy. Just in a total aside, these have Nietzsche's books have beautiful titles. Thus Spake Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil. I remember I just cracked open Beyond Good and Evil on like page 316. I just said, okay, what is Beyond Good and Evil? It has to be a higher form of truth or something. And I'm not saying this is representative, but it amused me that the first thing I open to was a passage about Nietzsche complaining about women and cooking. And it was essentially to the effect that women who are bad cooks are responsible for, in his words, retarding the human race by failing to give nutrients to the growing generation. That mismanagement of actually feeding the body and the cells in the body and the mind, which allows them to think clearly, they kind of make them dumb. It was his point. And it's like, yeah, if you feed your kid garbage, then they're gonna reap those repercussions. But he just said it so bluntly, I found it like really funny. Like, oh, these women in these kitchen, these bad cooks. God, oh, I hate them. It was just, I was reading Beyond Good and Evil, and that was the last thing I expected to find it. It was so weird, I guess. I was just like, okay. It's like, yeah, I mean, yeah, you should feed, you could say, hey, all the women who feed their kids well and with lots of nutrients, they're the best mothers in the world. But instead he chose to say it, I guess, in just a negative way, which is saying all the bad mothers who feed their kids awfully, they're awful, they suck. But it's like, yeah, no, that's true. I mean, I guess if you feed your kid McDonald's all day, that's not the best. And yeah, it's trying so hard to be the Bible. Like, come on, dude. One day had Zarathustra fallen asleep under a fig tree owing to the heat, and his arms over his face, and there came an adder, and bit him in the neck, so that Zarathustra screamed in pain. When he had taken his arm from the face, he looked at the serpent, and then did recognize the eyes of Zarathustra, wriggling awkwardly, and tried to get away. Not at all, said Zarathustra. As yet thou hast not received my thanks. Thou hast awakened me in time. My journey is yet long. Thy journey is short, said the adder sadly. My poison is fatal. Zarathustra smiled. When did ever a dragon die of a serpent's poison, said he. But take thy poison back. Thou art not rich enough to present it to me. Then fell the adder again on his neck and licked his wound. When Zarathustra had once told his disciples, they asked him, "Oh, and what, O Zarathustra, is the moral of thy story?" And Zarathustra answered thus, "The destroyer of morality, the good and just call me. My story is immoral. When, however, ye have an enemy, then return him not good for evil, for that would abash him, but prove that he hath done something good to you, and rather be angry than abash anyone. And when ye are cursed, it pleaseth me not that ye should then desire to bless, rather curse a little also. So this is just the story or the parable of turn the other cheek. Like, if someone like assaults you and it's not life-threatening, then you just mock them by saying you're fine. Like, that's literally the same story. I don't get it. It's so weird. He's trying to say God is dead and then give all these biblical lectures as if he's God and he's some mega ultra ego Chad. I mean, I'd believe him if Nietzsche didn't die, I guess. But this just reads like, I don't know, like a 13-year-old boy's fantasies. It's just weird. I don't know. It just feels empty. Like, yeah, man, like take a bunch of responsibility and fight the world and like put it all on your back and like you have to be fierce. And it's like, you don't need to tell me that. Like, that's the normal way of things. Like, it sounds like the ramblings of some rich kid who hasn't had to work a day in his life, and he's like, oh man, you know, being tough, being like a tattooed tough guy with muscles and suffering. That's so cool, man. That's so hardcore. Like, I don't want to be a namby-pamby business guy with a family. It's like he's weak and stuff. He can't do anything. I don't know. This is just like self-aggrandizing, hyper-narcissistic. I really don't want to not like Nietzsche. I want to like Nietzsche, but reading this, it's just so simple. There's not a lot of nuance. It's not subtle at all. It's just like, these people suck, get good. And if you're not getting good, if you're not on that grind set, bro, making money, then you suck, man. Like, there might be more to life than that. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just complaining about Nietzsche at this point. Okay. I don't know. Nietzsche is just a materialist. He's just the most typical atheist preacher that I've ever seen, that without anything beyond ourselves, without spirituality, without heaven, without karma, without repercussions, everything is just material, and everything is about power, and everything is about getting stronger and destroying the weak. And everything, I would say, about Nietzsche revolves around truth and what is true. And it's so hyper-focused on truth that it discards and disregards love. Like, he literally disregards the priest in the first chapter who sings and kind of frolics through the forest and saying he's basically a fool who serves a dead god. Meanwhile, he's like the only happy character in this book, I guess, as foolish as he is. So it's a hyperfixation on truth, on strength, and his truth is that there couldn't possibly be a God. And, you know, I remember what it was like. I mean, I used to be an atheist, so I understand that mentality, which is like, you can't rely on a giant magical sky person to help you with your problems. You can't rely on any of this. All you can do is rely on yourself and just, you know, get on the grind. And the issue is that there's nothing to give you hope in that scenario where you are failing. Like every story in the hero's journey, like a reflection of our own lives, we have our ups and our downs. And when you're down and you don't have hope, I mean, you need a hope in yourself to some extent. But when people are not able to hope in themselves, they turn to religion, and that helps them. But in here, it's like you just have to hope in yourself and nothing else. And I I personally think that humans are not like that. They need something that is helping them, even if it's not real. And Nietzsche's like, no, you can just do it. It's fine. And again, like, dude, seriously, chapter 72, the supper. And yeah, at this point, there's like 3 different people with Zarathustra in the cave. For at this point, the soothsayer interrupted the greeting of Zarathustra and his guests. He pressed forward as one who had no time to lose, seized Zarathustra's hand and exclaimed, "But Zarathustra, one thing is more necessary than the other. So sayest thou thyself. Well, one thing is now more necessary unto me than all others, a word at the right time. Didst thou not invite me to the table? And here are many who have made long journeys. Thou dost not mean to feed us merely with discourses. Besides, all of you have thought too much about freezing, drowning, suffocating, and other bodily dangers. None of you, however, have thought of my danger, namely perishing of hunger." Thus spake the soothsayer. When Zarathustra's animals, however, heard these words, they ran away in terror, for they all saw that they might be brought home during the day, would not be enough to fill the one soothsayer. Likewise, perishing of thirst, continued the soothsayer, and although I hear water splashing here like words of wisdom, that is to say, plenteously and unweariedly, I want wine. Anyway, the whole book is like this. It's all very self-indulgent. It's basically a book of narcissistic prose. And it's very tiring to read it. It's very tiring. On a very technical level to read this, it's very tiring. But, you know, I understand he's very popular, but I'm not a fan. Ye higher men, so thinketh the populace. There are no higher men. We are all equal. Man is man before God. We are all equal. Before God, now, however, this God hath died. Before the populace, however, we will not be equal. Ye higher men, away from the marketplace. Before God, now, however, this God hath died. Ye higher men, this God was your greatest danger. Only since he lay in the grave, have ye again arisen. Not now only cometh the great noontide, now only doth the neighbor man become master. Have ye understood this word, O my brethren? Ye are frightened. Do your hearts turn giddy? Doth the abyss here yawn for you? Doth the hell-hound here yelp at you? Well, take heart, ye higher men. Now only travaileth the mountain of the human future. God hath died. Now do we desire the Superman to live. Anyway, my whole issue with Nietzsche's argument is that he's saying that God and religion stopped the man from surpassing and becoming his best self. And maybe that was what he was taught at the time. Maybe that was the zeitgeist at the time when he wrote this. But in my experience with religion is there to stop you from going down into destructive paths. Not to stop you from ascending, but to stop you from going down. And the whole sort of masculine urge to, kill somebody, let's say, it might be the right thing to do in terms of vengeance and our personal nature. But when the Bible says thou shalt not kill, it's, at least the way I've interpreted it, it means that if you do kill, you're going to suffer the psychological consequences of that, which is that you have to deal with the fact that even if you killed a murderer, it still feels weird and wrong to have killed somebody. That you can see a dead body and be like, oh, I did that. And it's not a good feeling. And of course, people are forced into that situation every point throughout history. And it doesn't feel good, but sometimes it's necessary. And if you can avoid it, you should. But Nietzsche is kind of saying, oh, well, we could just take over the world if only religion wasn't stopping us. And so the question is, well, okay, what's stopping you then? If you're such a big man, then go and do it. Like, this is what I don't like about this book, is that it's saying, oh yeah, I'm going to be the best guy. I'm going to take over everything. I'm going to, whatever. And like, okay, good. But it sounds like, the ramblings of some insecure guy who says he's going to be a big man. He's going to make it big. And then he chickens out and can't do it. He can't commit to it. He can't actually live out his fantasies because he's simply thinking in terms of truth and statistics and whatever, and has nothing more to himself other than his animal nature rather than a higher nature. So the soothsayer Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer. I hate Schopenhauer. I mean, I don't think is there anyone who actually likes Schopenhauer? He was the most pessimistic, negative old man in all history. It's the funniest thing. Maybe if I read more of his stuff, I will change my mind. But my current understanding of Schopenhauer is that he was incredibly negative and pessimistic. And yeah. And you know what? In the back of the book here, it does have sort of summaries of these chapters. It's interesting how Nietzsche puts this, that essentially that he sees weakness in the Christian God, and that he specifically targets a certain social class which wants a very soft, loving, forgiving, whatever God. And it's like, I understand what he means. And he's basically saying that society now is soft and weak. And so the God of the conquering Israelites no longer reflects who we are as a people. And so it's been changed into this civilized, peaceful God, because that's the society that we have right now. And so he says, no, it should be, we don't have any use for him, and he's weak, and we should destroy him, and we should destroy all of this stuff. I mean, I don't know, the whole psychological profile of that does not speak to wellness. It speaks to a very destructive nature. I don't know. I mean, I've tried to be open-minded to, this, and I think that is an issue where, the church today is composed of a very almost lackadaisical, uncaring push over, thought and attitude. But it's weird because you also think, well, there were also the Crusades. There were also, different phases of Christianity, and it's kind of like we're blaming the society as reflecting a different kind of God that he doesn't like. And it's like, okay, unless you actually care about the religion that you're in and you read it, you kind of are able to adapt it to yourself if it's complex enough. So like, I get what he's saying, and I get his point that it seems weak and stupid and not engaging to him. And instead of trying to understand how he might fit into that or see his version, he just kind of outright rejects it and says, you know what, I'm God. I'm the best. I'm gonna, basically defeat all this stuff, and I'll be, the Superman. And that's Nietzsche's point. I don't necessarily disagree with it in the sense, like, yes, you should be strong and independent and the best version you can be. You just don't need to be so negative about it. Like, I mean, can you imagine preaching this to a bunch of coal miners that they need to be tough and stand up for themselves and become the Uberman? It's like, yeah, they're working their asses off. They don't need to be told that they need to be tough and that life is hard. Like a child knows that almost. So it's very truth-based. It's not about hope. It's not about, having courage in yourself. It's really about tearing down the soft, weak hope that people have. And yeah, I agree, it could be better and it should be better. But what he's replacing it with is something I just personally do not feel in my heart or my mind. Or in my mind, I already know. It's like, hey, we have to be like, we have to be Chads. We have to be able to deal with anything. And it's like, yeah, no, I know, I got that. Yeah, it's like it's self-evident. So that's my main issue with Nietzsche's work, is that he doesn't say anything truly deep or interesting. It's just a bunch of it feels like a bunch, again, of male, Sigma male, black and white, advice posting. It's just if you're a man, you got to struggle. And it's like, yeah, you do. That's not a revelation. That's the nature of things. So I just wanted to read this part. Zarathustra calls the ugliest man the murderer of God. Certainly, this is one aspect of a certain kind of atheism. The atheism of the man who reveres beauty to such an extent that his own ugliness, which outrages him, must be concealed from every eye, lest it should not be respected as Zarathustra respected it. If there be a God, he too must be evaded. His pity must be foiled, but God is ubiquitous and omniscient. Therefore, for the really great ugly man, he must not exist. Their pity is it from which I flee away, says he, and that is to say, it is from their want of reverence and lack of shame and presence, and of my great misery. The ugliest man despises himself, but Zarathustra said in his prologue, I love the great despisers because they are the great adorers, and arrows of longing for the other shore. He therefore honors the ugliest man, sees heights in himself content, and invites him to join the other higher men in the cave. So it's trying to be moral without appealing to... Oh my God. So yeah, it's if you didn't read this book, it'd be like, oh man, life is tough. You got to struggle with it and become the best you can possibly be. And it's if you had never read this, you would do that anyway, if you have self-respect. So I guess this is great if you have no self-esteem and you want to hear someone for once in your life say, hey, you should be the best version of yourself. If no one's ever told you that, then hey, go ahead and read this. Otherwise, I really don't recommend this. I would say you the first two chapters are interesting because it's not too hard to read. It gets into what he talks about, the priest and the tightrope walker, and that's very understandable, very memorable. And the rest of it, I don't care for. There's some part he talks about brown Caribbean girls or something. Yeah, I don't know. It's just confusing and not impressive. Anyway, that's going to be my take on Nietzsche, and for better or for worse, if the Nietzsche fans want to hate me, go right ahead. But yeah, I'm not seeing why this guy is so revered. He doesn't say anything deep. But yeah, that is Nietzsche. Yeah, I don't know what else to say, guys. It's not what I expected, and I didn't super enjoy it, but whatever. Anyway, as always, guys, I'll see you later, and keep reading.